Joining me now is the Democratic governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer. Governor Whitmer, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Thanks for having me.
Well, Governor, thank you for being here on a big morning. Former President Trump held a rally last night. He did not mention the issue of abortion, but earlier this week he noted that abortion laws are left up to the states. He said he wouldn't support a national ban. How concerned are you that his efforts to straddle the line could effectively weaken this issue for Democrats?
Well, I think your phraseology, straddle the line, is generous. He's lied. He's lied over and over again to the people of this country. The only person who should be making a decision about whether and when to have a child is a woman, the people she loves and trusts, and her doctor, period. Politicians need to get out of the way. And the American people have over and over again told us that's their exact expectations. And so as I speak to people in my state or around the country, it's very clear abortion is not just on the ballot in places like Arizona and Florida. It is on the ballot in all 50 states because the former president has said many different times that he would sign a national abortion ban. And that's really a very real possibility that would undo all the progress we've made in states like Michigan, Ohio, Kentucky, etc. This is on the ballot for every one of us in this presidential election.
Governor, you take me to my next question, which is, do you think that President Biden should make this the defining issue above all others in 2024 on the campaign trail?
Well, I think that this is at the heart of so many Americans' concerns, our fundamental freedoms as Americans, our ability to make the most consequential economic decision in our lifetime is whether and when to have a child. It is the ability for the infertile couples, so many millions of whom have relied on embryonic in vitro fertilization. All of these things are very much at risk, and I know that it is at the heart and center of people who want desperately to start families, who desperately need access to medical care. And our choice could not be more stark. We have a president right now who is standing between a national abortion ban and has used his powers to expand access for women in this country, and the guy who appointed 3 lying Supreme Court justices to the bench who are the architects of the Roe repeal. And let's be very clear, Donald Trump did this.
So just to be very clear, should President Biden make this the #1 issue? Should abortion be the #1 issue in 2024?
Well, abortion, the fundamentals of our democracy, whether or not we can be safe here, whether or not we're going to continue to rebuild American manufacturing and bring supply chains home. I mean, it's hard to say what one issue is more important than others when there are so many fundamental issues that are at stake, and that we've got 2 candidates that couldn't be more different on all of these issues. But I do think that the fundamental right to make your own decisions about your body is going to be a #1 motivator for a lot of folks in this country.
Governor, President Biden has said that if he's reelected, he will codify Roe v. Wade. As you know, it is highly unlikely he will have 60 votes in the Senate to do that. Is the president offering voters false hope on this point?
I think the president has been very clear that he absolutely supports this fundamental reproductive freedom for all Americans, and he'll do everything in his power. You know, we thought in Ohio it might be real difficult to get abortion rights codified. They surprised us. And so I'm not going to, foresee and predict what the odds are, but I can tell you, we have seen this issue has motivated people because they know that this is a fundamental question of who we are as a society and how we are going to empower Americans to do what they need to do to protect their health, to grow their families, to make their own decisions in their own lives. And politicians should get the heck out of the way.
Let me ask you a little bit about the policy. According to the CDC, slightly less than 1% of abortions occur after fetal viability. Where do you stand on this, Governor? Should there be any limits on abortion after viability, which usually falls somewhere between 24 to 26 weeks?
The Roe standard did have that, and that's precisely what we've been fighting for. But
so you support that, Governor? Just to be clear, you would support some limitations after viability?
I would support I would support the Roe standard becoming the law of the nation again. That's exactly where I'm at. And I know that's where most Americans are. But I'll also share with you, Kristen, I am not a doctor. I would rely on medical advice, but in my experience, it is only the woman and the person who's giving her medical advice, a scientist, that should be articulating what the standards are in this space.
You know, I ask you in part because, as you know, former President Trump has falsely accused Democrats of wanting abortion up until birth. Do you think that Democrats need to more clearly define where they stand on this part of the debate, on where limits should be?
I think what we should do is be holding Donald Trump accountable. Let's remember the reason that we're in this mess is because of his appointees to the Supreme Court. 3 people who lied to Congress when they said they thought Roe was the settled law of the land. He put them on that court, and they are the reason that Roe was ripped away from Americans. They've lied to us. He has lied to us. You cannot trust anything Donald Trump says about this issue, or frankly, in my opinion, a whole host of others. And that's precisely why I think it's so important that we reelect Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to the White House, because they are the only ones you can trust on this issue. Their position has been rock solid. They trust women and medical providers, and that's the only people who should be making these decisions.
Let's talk about what is happening in the Middle East. Approximately 60% of Michigan voters disapprove of President Biden's handling of the war in Gaza. Your state obviously has the largest Arab American population in the country. Less than 20% of Arab Americans nationally say that they will vote to reelect President Biden. Do you think this issue, President Biden's handling of the war in the Middle East, could cost him the state of Michigan?
I think that the state of Michigan is always going to be a close race, no matter what, under what scenario. I will share, though, as I've had conversations with people both in my Jewish community and in the Arab American and Muslim and Palestinian communities, that a lot of people are hurting right now. A lot of people are 1 degree of separation from someone who's lost their lives, whether it was on October 7th or is in the war in Gaza. And so I'm trying to keep an open dialogue to stay focused on how we support these beautiful, diverse communities here in Michigan. And I'm hoping for peace. But obviously, after the events of the last 24 hours, there's a lot that is evolving here. And I'm glad to see that our president said we have an ironclad commitment to the security of Israel.
Some Democrats, including from your state, are calling the war in Gaza a genocide. Would you go that far? Do you believe that what is happening inside Gaza is a genocide?
I think that it's heartbreaking to see the loss of so many innocent lives, children, every day that this war continues to be prosecuted. And that's why, as governor, as commander-in-chief of the Michigan National Guard, I'm watching this very closely and doing what I can to support all of these communities here in Michigan.
But you don't go that far to use that term genocide.
I'm not going to weigh in where I know that a lot of these terms are used to inflame and divide us. I'm going to stay focused on being productive and hoping that we can have some peace very soon.
I want to ask you about what the country will be watching this week. Former President Trump's criminal trial will get underway in New York and Manhattan for allegedly falsifying business records to attempt to conceal payments to a porn star. We should note that Mr. Trump has denied any wrongdoing in this case. Do you think the Biden campaign, which is currently planning to counter-program these criminal trials, should be leaning in more directly, talking about Trump's trials directly?
You know, I'm not sure, Kristen. To be honest, we are in unprecedented territory. We have a former sitting president who's got 4 different criminal trials in process. This one's kicking off. We keep referring to it as hush money, but I like how you actually went a step further to explain to people. He lied on his business financials. This is a man who is loyal to one thing. The truth is not it. It is Donald Trump. His story changes. He has betrayed his oath of office. He betrayed his postpartum wife and their new child. He has betrayed all the people that invested in his companies and the people who worked for him. This is, I think, one more very clear reason why I don't think we can trust this man with our future, with our democracy, and certainly with our fundamental rights.
All right. Governor Gretchen Whitmer, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.